The crystal glasses clinked together in a toast. Laughter echoed through the grand dining room of my uncle's villa, a sound that used to make my stomach clench with anxiety. Tonight, it was music to my ears. My brother Minh stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. My parents beamed at him, their gazes filled with an adoration I had never known. They were celebrating his new strategic partnership, another venture funded by debt and delusion. A venture propped up by the collective assets of our entire extended family. They all felt so safe, so untouchable, wrapped in the myth of the golden child's success. They had no idea that their gilded cage was about to collapse. They were celebrating with my money, and I was about to reclaim every last cent, with interest. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that cut through the merriment. A moment of confusion settled over the room. My uncle grumbled about uninvited guests. A uniformed courier stood at the door, holding a thick, formal envelope. He wasn't looking for my uncle or my brother. He asked for my father, the nominal head of the family. My father took the envelope, a flicker of annoyance on his face. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the first page. The color drained from his face. My mother, sensing his distress, peered over his shoulder. Her cheerful smile froze, then shattered like brittle glass. The document was passed from hand to hand, each person's arrogant posture deflating as they read it. It was an official notice of default, a demand for immediate repayment of a colossal loan, and an enumeration of all the assets pledged as collateral: my parents' house, my uncle's villa, my aunt's farmland. Everything. Panic began to bubble, replacing the laughter with frantic, terrified whispers. You might be wondering how the family's greatest failure, the son they cast out and mocked, became the one holding their entire future in his hands. It all began with a lie, a broken promise, and 20 years of being told I was worthless. To understand my family, you have to understand their hierarchy. There was my older brother, Minh, the sun around which everyone orbited. And then there was me, the shadow he cast. Growing up, this was a law of nature. At the dinner table, the best cuts of meat were always placed in his bowl. He got new clothes for the Lunar New Year. I wore his faded hand-me-downs. When he scraped his knee, my mother would rush over with bandages and soothing words. When I broke my arm falling out of a tree, my father's first question was, "How much will the doctor cost?" My accomplishments were ignored. My mistakes were magnified. His failures were always someone else's fault, often mine. This dynamic was cemented forever on my 18th birthday. My grandfather, a man who saw the unfairness but was too old to fight it, had left me a small plot of farmland in his will. It was my only inheritance, my only real asset. He had told me, "This is for your education, Anne. This is your escape." I treasured that piece of paper, that promise of a future I could build for myself. But my family saw it differently. They didn't see it as my future. They saw it as a resource for their chosen one. Minh, ever the dreamer with no discipline, had decided he wanted to start a tech company. He had a flashy presentation and a lot of buzzwords, but no capital. My parents called a family meeting. They didn't ask me, they informed me. They were selling my land to fund Minh's startup. "He is the future of this family," my father announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "His success will be your success. It is your duty to sacrifice for the good of everyone." I tried to protest, my voice trembling. I brought up my grandfather's dying wish. My mother sighed. A sound of pure disappointment aimed directly at me. "Don't be so selfish, Anne," she said, her tone sharp. "Minh has a brilliant mind. You are more practical. You can always find work. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for him. I was just a boy. They were my parents. They took my land, sold it, and handed the cash to my brother. I received nothing, not even a thank you. I only got a lecture on the importance of familial duty." That was the day I learned that in my family, my only value was what could be taken from me. With no inheritance and no support, I was forced to drop out of my university program. I took on manual labor jobs, saving every single dong I could. I ate instant noodles for months, lived in a tiny rented room, and poured every bit of my energy into a single goal, proving them wrong. I started a small business, a very humble trading company that helped local farmers in Namjin sell their rice and specialty produce to distributors in the city. It was grueling work, built on cold calls, early mornings at the market, and my own sweat. For 3 years, it grew slowly but steadily. I wasn't rich, but I was independent. I was building something that was mine. Then, a disastrous typhoon season hit the Red River Delta. A massive shipment, my biggest contract yet, was ruined by flooding. The loss was catastrophic. I was facing ruin, but I had a plan. All I needed was a small bridge loan to cover my debts to the farmers and stay afloat until the next harvest. The amount I needed was less than 1/10 of what they had given Minh from the sale of my land. Swallowing my pride, a pride I had carefully nurtured for years, I went to my parents. I laid out my business plan, my profit and loss statements, and my recovery strategy. I wasn't begging, I was presenting a business proposal. They listened in stony silence in their living room, with Minh sitting on the best armchair like a king holding court. When I finished, my father laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You want us to throw our money into a sinking ship?" he scoffed. "We invested in a sure thing, your brother's company. You were always meant for simple labor on. You should have accepted it." My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with pity that felt more like poison. "We can't help you. It would be irresponsible." But it was Minh who delivered the final, devastating blow. He leaned forward, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Actually, father, I tried to help him," he said, the picture of a concerned brother. "I had dinner with Mr. Tran from the city distribution company last week. I might have mentioned Anne was struggling a bit. I told him our family would always stand behind my own ventures, of course. He had deliberately poisoned my reputation with my biggest remaining client. He didn't just let me fail, he pushed me off the cliff. 2 days later, my company was officially bankrupt. As I packed up my small office, all I could think about was the sound of their laughter. It was a sound I promised myself I would one day silence forever. Bankruptcy wasn't just a financial state, it was a physical one. I sold my desk, my phone, and finally, my old motorbike. I was adrift. For weeks, I walked the streets of Namjin, a ghost in my own hometown. Every familiar face felt like an accusation. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about me, the failed son of the respectable Nguyen family. I ended up in a cheap guest house, renting a bed in a room with 5 other men. At night, I'd lie there listening to them snore, the weight of my family's prophecy crushing me. "You are meant for simple labor. You aren't cut out for more." The thought echoed in the dark. For a moment, I almost believed them. Their words had become my reality. One afternoon, seeking to escape the city center, I walked until the buildings gave way to the sprawling rice paddies, and then to the gray, imposing structures of an industrial park. I sat on a concrete block, watching the foreign managers and the local workers. I saw the friction, the small, constant misunderstandings born from language and culture. I watched a German engineer trying to explain a complex schematic to a local foreman, his frustration mounting with every failed gesture. The foreman, proud and unwilling to lose face, simply nodded, clearly not understanding a thing. I knew that mistake would cost the company thousands of dollars in wasted materials. And then, it hit me. It was a jolt, sharp and clear. My failure had given me a unique education. I understood the precise language of contracts and logistics from my failed business, but I also understood the nuances of my own people. I knew why the foreman nodded instead of asking questions. I knew which local suppliers were reliable and which were not. I saw a gap, a gap that existed because two worlds were colliding without a proper bridge. My family had taken my land, my inheritance, and my first company. But they couldn't take what I had learned in the process. That night, I stopped looking back. The memory of their laughter didn't sting anymore. It became my fuel. I used the last of my money to buy a used laptop. I created a simple one-page website offering logistical and cross-cultural facilitation for foreign enterprises. It wasn't a business. It was a declaration of war, fought not with anger, but with silent, relentless competence. My first client was the German engineers company. I didn't just translate. I mediated. I explained the engineer's technical needs to the foreman in a way that respected his experience, and I explained the foreman's practical constraints to the engineer in a way that preserved his authority. The project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. The German manager was ecstatic. He recommended me to the Korean factory next door, who were having issues with sourcing raw materials. I found them a new supplier, negotiated a better price, and streamlined their delivery schedule. Word began to spread through the tight-knit community of foreign investors in the region. I was the man who could solve problems. My one-page website evolved into a registered company, Viet Connect Solutions, or VCS. The name was deliberately generic, untraceable to me. I hired my first employees, sharp, hungry people who, like me, had been overlooked by the traditional systems. We didn't have a fancy office. We worked out of a small, converted shophouse, but we were relentless. We worked 18-hour days. We handled everything from negotiating land leases for new factories in the Rangjong Textile Park to managing entire supply chains for electronics manufacturers. While my brother was giving interviews to local business magazines, I was quietly becoming the invisible backbone of foreign direct investment in the province. I lived modestly. I drove a 10-year-old car and lived in a simple, clean apartment in Tai Bin, a city away from the prying eyes of my relatives in Namjin. To them, I had simply disappeared off the face of the earth. On the rare occasions my name came up, they likely assumed I was driving a delivery truck or working on a construction site somewhere, a fate they had deemed appropriate for me. They had no idea that the silent, unknown founder of VCS was now managing assets and contracts worth hundreds of times what they had stolen from me. Minh's success was a performance, funded by loans and designed to be seen. He bought European cars and designer watches to project an image. My wealth was a weapon, hidden and waiting. While he was celebrating his imagined victories, I was patiently, methodically, buying the bullets for my war. For years I focused solely on building my fortress, brick by silent brick. I paid no attention to my family, treating them as ghosts from a past life. But then, news of my brother's grand celebration for his strategic partnership reached me through a business acquaintance. The man mentioned Minh's name with admiration, impressed by the facade he had built. It was then I knew the time was coming. An animal that roars that loudly is often the most wounded. I tasked the discreet corporate intelligence division of VCS, a team I had built to vet potential partners and acquisitions, with a new, top-priority project, a comprehensive financial audit of Minh's company and every single one of my close relatives. The report that landed on my desk a week later was more damning than I could have ever imagined. Minh's company wasn't just struggling. It was an empty shell, a black hole of debt. His entire operation, his lavish lifestyle, the parties, the cars, it was all funded by one enormous loan from a regional commercial bank. But the true masterpiece of his recklessness was on page 12. The bank, growing nervous, had recently demanded more security for the loan. Unable to provide it himself, Minh had done something breathtakingly arrogant. He had convinced my parents, my aunts, and my uncles to co-sign the loan, pledging their homes, their businesses, and the ancestral land as collateral. They had tied their entire existence to his sinking ship, blinded by their faith in the golden child. The path forward was crystal clear. A bank holding such a toxic, high-risk loan would be eager to offload it, even at a loss, to clean up its books. I met with my lead counsel, a brilliant lawyer who owed his career to me. I instructed him to establish a shell corporation based in Singapore, a nameless, faceless entity designed for a single purpose. Through this corporation, my lawyer, acting as an agent for an anonymous foreign investor, approached the bank. He made an offer to purchase the entire debt portfolio. As I predicted, the bank, facing a likely default, jumped at the chance to recover most of its capital. They sold the entire loan, with all its associated collateral agreements, for a significant discount. The transaction was clean, digital, and completely anonymous. One evening, I received a simple text message from my lawyer. "The transfer is complete. You are the creditor." I now owned every chain that bound them. I chose the night of the family's grand Lunar New Year gathering to make my move. It was the peak of their arrogance, the one time of year they all gathered at my uncle's villa to worship at the altar of their own success. I had been invited as an afterthought, a token gesture of pity so they could feel magnanimous. I sat at the far end of the table, a ghost in their midst, sipping my tea. They ignored me, their voices loud as they toasted Minh's genius and the family's bright future. My uncle boasted about the new renovations on his villa. My aunt talked about the European cruise she was planning. They were spending money they didn't have, celebrating profits that didn't exist. Then came the doorbell, exactly as I had scheduled. The courier, professional and impassive, handed the legal-sized envelope to my father. I watched as his jovial expression dissolved into a mask of pale confusion. He passed the document to my uncle, who snatched it from his hands. The silence spread like a virus. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "What is this? What does it mean, asset seizure?" she whispered, her voice trembling. My relatives, who minutes before were praising my brother, now turned on him. "Minh, what did you do? Our houses are on this list," my aunt shrieked, her voice cracking. Minh, ever the performer, tried to seize control. He grabbed the papers and laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "Everyone calm down. It's obviously a mistake, some kind of sophisticated scam." He exuded a false confidence, patting my father on the back. "I will call the bank manager right now and sort this out." He scrolled through his phone, but as he reread the document, his fingers slowed. He saw the name of the legal entity that now owned his debt. Viet Connect Solutions, S. Pte Ltd., and the clause stating the original bank had discharged its interest entirely. There was no bank manager to call. There was only the new unknown creditor. His bluster evaporated, replaced by the cold, clammy sweat of pure fear. I let the chaos peak. I let them scream and accuse. Then I slowly stood up. The movement was small, but it drew every eye in the room. I walked calmly to the head of the table and placed my teacup down. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the hysteria like a razor. "It is not a scam," I said, "and it is not a mistake." They all stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. "The debt is due, the collateral is forfeit, and I am your new creditor." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. The idea was so impossible, so contrary to the universe they had constructed, that their brains couldn't accept it. My father was the first to react, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. "Enough of this madness," he bellowed, trying to reclaim his authority. "You will apologize for this sick joke and leave my brother's house." I didn't even flinch. I looked past him, at the document still clutched in my uncle's trembling hand. "There is no joke," I stated calmly. "Only a debt, a very large one." Reality began to seep in, and with it came a different tactic. My mother stumbled forward, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Anne, my child," she sobbed, the words catching in her throat. How can you do this to your own mother, to your family? We raised you, we fed you. Is your heart made of stone? Her performance was masterful, the same one she had used to guilt me my entire life. But the spell was broken. I gently removed her hand from my arm. You're right, I said, my voice even and cold. You did raise me. You taught me that it is one's duty to sacrifice for the family. You taught me that when you sold my land. You taught me that when you let my business die. Now it is your turn to sacrifice for the consequences of your choices. Minh, seeing his parents' appeals failing, finally snapped. His face, once smug, was now a twisted mask of rage and terror. You snake, you planned this. You were always jealous of me, he screamed, taking a step forward before my uncle held him back. I met his gaze without blinking. Jealous? I asked, a slight mirthless smile touching my lips for the first time. No, brother, I'm grateful. Your arrogance was my greatest asset. I turned my attention back to the whole room, my voice becoming formal, devoid of any emotion. This is not a family discussion. This is a legal notification. You have until noon tomorrow to wire the full principal and accrued interest to the account listed. If the payment is not received, my legal team will begin foreclosure proceedings on every single property listed as collateral. The villa we are standing in will be the first. I then turned and walked toward the door, leaving them frozen in the wreckage of their lives. The noon deadline came and went in silence. No wire transfer arrived. They had nothing. It was all a fantasy, a house of cards built on my stolen inheritance and mountains of debt. I sent a single-word email to my legal team. Proceed. The machine I had built for years whirred into motion. It was not emotional or dramatic. It was brutally efficient. Foreclosure notices were posted. Locksmiths were dispatched. Asset managers began the methodical process of liquidating my family's entire world. My uncle's villa, the site of their last arrogant celebration, was the first to be seized. My parents were given 30 days to vacate the house I grew up in. Minh's company, exposed as a hollow shell, imploded overnight. His strategic partners vanished. He was left with nothing but his reputation, which was now worthless. A month later, after the noise had faded, I drove out of the city. I didn't go to see their new, small, rented apartment. I didn't go to inspect the villa that was now one of my many properties. I drove to that small plot of farmland my grandfather had left me. The land they had sold to fund a lie. Through the foreclosure, it had come back to me. I got out of my car and walked onto the soil. It was quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling through the young rice shoots planted by a tenant farmer. I had thought this moment would feel like a victory, a fiery culmination of my revenge. But it didn't. The anger that had fueled me for years had burned itself out, leaving behind a profound stillness. Standing on that piece of earth, I realized the truth. My goal was never just to punish them, it was to free myself. I spent half my life chasing the approval of people who saw me as a resource to be exploited. I had allowed their judgment to define me, first as a failure and then as an avenger. But their power over me was an illusion I had helped maintain. By holding them accountable, I wasn't just settling a score. I was taking back the pen and writing my own story. They didn't make me a failure, and they didn't make me a success. I did. Their world had to be dismantled so that mine could finally be built.